You're listening to The Journey with Ellie and Erin. Join us every week as we talk about all the things woo, wise and wonderful with our guests and have the bigger, braver, bolder conversations that women should be having so that we can be the change the world needs. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Journey. So nice to be back with you all. I'm Erin. That's Ellie.
Hello.
And hi. Gosh, nice and bright and sparkly in the morning. And obviously we're recording this in the morning here in New Zealand. And how are you doing, Ellie?
I am good. I think is probably the pause is needed because I had to check in with the tiredness that I'm feeling, having been up with my 3-year-old quite a lot last night, and just managing school holidays, and the juggle is real because over here in New Zealand schooling is totally different, and I still can't really get my head around how it all works, but it's basically 4 terms with 2 weeks in between each term, except for summer holidays, which is long like in the UK. But we're in the 2 weeks, second week of school holidays at the moment, and it's been good. I mean, the girls have been great, but trying to juggle that, it's almost the guilt that comes with wanting to do my work, because I love the work that we do and it brings me lots of joy and lots of happiness, and at the same time feeling like I should be hanging out with the children all the time. So I've kind of been working a little bit on that sort of mindset, I suppose. But how about you? How are your school holidays going?
Yeah, pretty good. I know a coach that might be able to help you with that.
You're funny.
My holidays have been really good, thanks. My children my eldest turned 11 in the weekend, so he has had a great old time celebrating being awesome, as he put it the other day. And nice. And, they've been busy playing with friends and catching up with family and that sort of stuff. And then my wife has this week off. So they've been busy swimming and ice skating and all of the things that you might want to do with, some spare time that I never seem to have. So, they've had a great old time. Set the
bar high. She's definitely the fun mum now, isn't she?
Let's be fair. She was always the fun mum. And I have always been the grumpy mum because I'm the one that has the structure of this is what we need to do. So, so they've had a great little break away from school and heading into their last ever term at their current school. My eldest ages out basically at the end of this year. He would normally be starting a new school, but because we're leaving the country, neither of them will be going back to that school next year. So it's going to be a full-on 9.5 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever it is that coming up. And
you've also been plastering away as well, if I remember rightly. I feel like I've had lots of conversations with you doing all of the things that I would definitely be paying somebody to do, because jib is not something that I work with on a regular basis.
Yeah. Well, I've been plastering the boys' bedroom in preparation for painting, and plastering the top of our hallway, which is a hangover from a renovation from 2 years ago that it was a big renovation, paid people to do it. But the last part of it was just freshening up the look of the hallway, and that was my job that I've never really got to. So doing that and, tidying the house and trying to move things out and just get sorted. It's busy times, but it's also really exciting times. And so, when I'm feeling the pain of having plastered all day, I'm sitting in gratitude as much as possible about the fact that it's allowing us to move forward and get closer to going. So exciting times. And my parents arrive in about 6 weeks' time, I think, coming over from the UK, which we're starting to. I actually feel I can actually count down to it a little bit more now. It feels like it's actually going to happen. I mean, they booked it back in March, I think, which just felt like such a long way. I mean, we didn't know what the world was going to be doing, but now it feels like they will be arriving. So that's lots of fun. And I've just got to tell you one funny little story from last night. So I do Toastmasters. So I do
bit of public speaking, and I really enjoy it, and it's a really great group of people, and I really enjoy it. So I was just saying to my daughter Emily before, I was just like, I'm just off to my speaking thing this evening, so I'll see you, you'll be asleep when I get home. She's like, oh yeah, where are you off to? Oh, is it Breadmasters? And I just thought, and I just looked at her. She's like, "Oh no, sorry, Toastmasters." And I'm not sure if she was doing it as a quip, as a joke, or if she genuinely just got confused. But man, it made me chuckle. I
mean, that's a decent dose of Matt in her, if that is a joke, because that's totally something he would wet himself laughing about. Like,
yeah, it's a total dad joke, isn't it?
Yeah. So if she's smart enough to have made that joke, to be fair. But if it was, then yeah, she needs to spend less time with Matt, please. Just saying.
Yeah, it did. It really made. I chuckled my way to Breadmasters.
Awesome. Well, we're about to play an interview or a chat that we had with a guest, Candice, who we've known for a little while now, and it was as always, another soul-filling, rich conversation about all the things. So I'm excited to share that with the world, and we should wrap this up and get back to work, right?
Absolutely. We've got stuff to do, and we will be sharing some of the stuff that we are working on at the moment. So this is like a total teaser. Not going to tell you what it is, but you've definitely got to keep tuning in to hear about the things that we have been putting our little minds to create some goodness in the world. So
I like how you describe them as little, those minds.
Oh, okay, they're massively huge, but I thought, it's sort of, let's build up to it. But no, the conversation with Candice was delightful as always. She's an incredible being, and I love her openness and just her total willingness to share her experiences and how that can help others. So, yeah, enjoy, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. So, we'll catch you soon.
Hello, and welcome to The Journey with Ellie and Erin. Today we have an amazing guest, someone we are very grateful to know. She has been in our world for a little while, and I'm going to just basically read her bio because I can't do it justice without that. So 20 years ago, she survived years of sexual assault from her boyfriend. 14 years ago, she decided not to kill herself. 11 years ago, she was left with $350,000 worth of bad debt and ruined credit. 9 years ago, she went into consumer proposal and began to clean up the mess. 7 years ago, she welcomed her gorgeous daughter into the world. 5 years ago, she left her marriage to fall in love with herself. 3 years ago, she allowed herself to fully heal and reconnect with her feminine. 2 years ago, she rebuilt her life, moved into her own tiny home, and found her lifetime love. And last year, she started her podcast and welcomed her baby boy, Earthside. Candice is a mum, podcaster, and essentialist who loves to engage in courageous conversations, especially about truth, trust, and boundaries. She has her own podcast, Create the Ripple Podcast, so you should check that out. She's learned the power of saying no and speaks openly about subtle abuse as it occurs in relationships, personally and professionally. Knowing that peace, freedom, and integrity start inside, Candice is an advocate for knowing your own truth and speaking it clearly and powerfully at home, at work, and to yourself. After a narcissistic partner cheated on her with multiple women, left her and the country with over $350,000 worth of bad debt, Candice was forced to rebuild her life, her credit, and most importantly, her trust in herself. The journey was not without its impact, and Candice shares powerfully about dealing with anxiety, shame, and learning to let go. Now, as a self-proclaimed essentialist, she's leading a big life while living in a tiny home, 324 square foot, with her love, 2 children, 2 dogs, and 1 cat. When grief rocked her world in 2020, Candice knew it was time to finally do the deeper healing work she had been putting off and change her negative patterns for good. Emerging from this place, Candice now embraces her wild, fierce, and receptive feminine nature. The journey to be and embrace all the parts of herself has led her to the place to start her wildly successful Create the Ripple podcast, Trust the Niggle and Tell the Truth, where she features guests who are living in their truth and integrity, including Ellie and I. You can check out the links for Candice in our show notes, and we are very, very happy to welcome you to our radio show and podcast. So welcome, Candice. It's nice to see you again. How are you doing,
So
friend?
good to be here. I'm so excited.
Right?
Beyond excited.
Does anybody else just kind of want to sit back and bask in that in that bio and just go, wow? I feel like that's kind of the vibe I'm sitting in. I'm like, I just actually want to like celebrate the fact for a minute that I'm in the presence of someone whose bio sounds that freaking awesome. What about you, Ellie?
100%. And just as you were reading through all of those different, stages of life, stages of healing, discussion points, I was like, oh my goodness, where is this conversation going to go? And having had a number of conversations with you before, I have a feeling it's going to go to lots of very cool spaces. But I guess the first question, and I'm totally going to jump off the blocks here because there was a little bet on how long I could stay quiet for, and I think I did it because mainly the bio was so fabulously detailed. So now I can win the money and ask the first question. So all in all, I'm very happy. But in terms of where you are today and that whole piece of being able to trust yourself fully, how has that process really happened? Because we know that a lot of the women we speak to, trusting yourself is something that people struggle with so much, and it kind of feels crazy when you break it down into the bare essentials of what we can't trust ourselves, and yet it's a challenge for so many people out there. What do you think was A, the real catalyst for doing it, and then B, how have you achieved it? Wow, you're amazing.
No, I'm a survivor, right? And have gone to being a thriver, which is, where I'd love a lot of other women to be. As you were asking the question, I'm like, well, it's messy. Ellie, it's very messy. And I think it's important to start there with someone who's maybe listening and they feel, my girlfriend says it best. She says, I just feel really gooey today. She's right in the middle of her healing journey. And she said, I just feel gooey. And I said, yeah, that's where it starts. And once you can come from that place, then you can rebuild however you need to. I think the journey to trusting myself happened after the narcissistic partner cheated on me, and I had randomly remarked to a woman I was sitting beside when I was drowning my sorrows in a glass of wine, and I said, well, I just don't trust men anymore. And she said, oh, that's not true. And then I said, okay, fine, I don't trust women. And she's like, no, that's not true either. And I said, gave her this face, and she said, you lost trust in yourself. And so you think the journey is that you're going to have to learn to trust people again or men again and go on that journey. But actually the real journey that I want you to think about embarking on is trusting yourself. We meet angels when we least expect them, even when you're ready to drown your sorrows in a glass of wine. And that stuck with me throughout the next few years as I was working through various things. It took me a long time before I finally turned inward, right about the time when the world shut down. And I did 14 weeks of deep healing work. I wish I'd made the time sooner, because I'd always said to myself, at some point I'll stop my life, I'll hit pause. I was a busy mom, I had a business, I was an entrepreneur. It's hard to hit pause and prioritize your healing, because we don't live in a culture yet that really, celebrates rest or celebrates healing. We're getting there. But it's hard to do. And it was very hard for me to do, because after the first sexual assault, because I didn't talk about it and I didn't do the deep healing work, I shifted heavily into my masculine side of my energy to protect myself. I felt like I had to protect me. And that impacted so many decisions, from how I was running my business to how I had friendships to how I moved through life. And I was totally out of touch with that deep feminine, fierce feminine that needed to do a lot of healing work. So for someone who says, well, how do I get back to trusting myself? It was an active choice. It was coming, and that's part of, the trust that will tell the truth. The telling the truth part is not about telling the world, although you will. It's about telling yourself the truth, which is a heck of a lot harder than telling the rest of the world. So it was looking myself in the eye and saying, you're not happy, you're not well, you don't love yourself, you don't trust yourself. What do you actually want? And I didn't know the answer to that. I was like, I don't even know what I want. I don't know what eggs I want to eat in the morning. I do what I think I'm supposed to. I do all of those things. And so it took some work to just start to ask myself, And then I gave myself the gift of time. It didn't feel like I was moving through that at all. And in truth, it took a number of years to do. But it was starting with that asking and then learning to listen and realizing, oh, I legitimately only want scrambled eggs. I don't like any other ones. I just want these. And I would celebrate those silly things. Like, I actually don't like Starbucks. I prefer this. And so, I mean, it sounds silly, but I think that's the subconscious working on some of those deep-seated things, because we're not taught how to listen to ourselves. We're certainly not encouraged to trust our deep inner knowing. We are taught from very young children, you know, how to make everybody else comfortable. And I think most of the decisions, if not all the decisions that had a deep, profound impact on me negatively, were because I was more concerned about making other people comfortable than I was about standing up and saying, this doesn't feel good. I don't know why, but I need to prioritize myself and prioritize myself first. And that's not selfish. It's imperative, I think.
Wow. There's just so much in those comments to unpack. And I think the first piece that I'm going to dive into, and then I'm going to actually let Erin get involved as well, is that I
don't like a trend, Ellie.
we don't get taught. We do not get taught to put our own needs first. Like we're told that it's selfish, that we shouldn't do it. All of these negative words, and that's not even just our behaviours, but even our emotions, how we feel. Like everything, we're basically told to shut down, and then we're surprised that people have problems trusting themselves, or we are surprised in ourselves that we have problems trusting ourselves, whereas we have no evidence to show that we can make these decisions that actually serve us, because we've spent the whole time pleasing everybody else. And certainly as a mum of two young daughters, and you know, you've got little people as well, like it's a huge responsibility to carry, to try and like stop the programming that I've lived with for 42 years of putting other people, not making people feel uncomfortable ahead of what my children need, and the fact that I want them to make me feel as uncomfortable as possible and other people as uncomfortable as possible, and yet at the same time challenges me on a daily basis. So it's a really it's a really interesting piece. But I love what you said about the gooiness. For me, when I'm in a healing space, when I know that something isn't quite, I feel wonky. That's mine. Everything just feels a little bit wonky. And you know, having done a lot of healing myself this year about learning to trust, not just trust myself. I've done that work for quite a wee while, but to not worry about what other people think when I trust myself. That has been the next piece of the puzzle, and it's layer upon layer around how we can, you know, take the learnings. You know, we can learn the stuff, but then how do we integrate it actually into our life? And then all of these other things sort of pop up and, you know, teach a bit of a lesson. And you know.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
I think what came up for me when you were talking about that, and you know, further cemented itself in my thoughts when Ellie was talking, was, you know, we talk about the generational changes around this sort of stuff, right? Like the fact that we're recognizing that actually all of the conditioning, everything that we've been taught, isn't necessarily serving us, and we don't want to pass that to our children. But what's interesting for me is that I've just had this thought around the fact that as much as our mothers may have encouraged us to go out into the world, because I don't buy into the narrative that our mothers told us we shouldn't do things and all of this stuff, and had a one-sided kind of impact. But I think the challenge has been they haven't necessarily modelled that in the way that they've gone out into the world. And so even if they were telling us, like, you know, go out and be brave, go, you can do anything you want, and all of those sorts of things, what we're actually seeing modelled for ourselves is not matching up with that all the time. And I think the change that is coming now, and the change that we are part of, is that we are much more conscious now that actually we have to model that behaviour. And so we can say all the things, but we have to follow through with the actions, which feels deeply uncomfortable. And, you know, there are times when I think we feel a little like we're failing at that sometimes, but actually that's, that's part of it.
We think, we know we're failing.
We know we're failing on a slightly epic scale, but
yes,
but you know what I mean. Like I think that's for me that's what came up in terms of the difference in this generation that we're in now, is that we are starting to understand that actually it's not enough to just tell our children they can be whatever they want to be and that they can do whatever they want to do. We have to live that for them so that they see that it is possible, because actions do speak louder than words in that respect. And, we're needing to really bring both of those things together, I think, in order to actually move things forward.
Yeah, I was actually having a conversation with my daughter a couple of days ago, because I've observed that sometimes she, acts out, and she's 7, so that's part of it, learning to express herself. And like you, Ellie, I've tried to, no, tell me what you're thinking, even though that, people say the sass, it's real. I'm like, yes, it is. And the last thing I want to do is shut her up and make her be a good girl, because that got me in all kinds of trouble. So how do we be appropriate in this situation? And I'm not winning that one all the time. But she was expressing these big emotions. And I said to her, Mummy's actually been thinking about something. So sometimes Mummy doesn't, react exactly the way she wants to. And, we're all mommies here, so we know the drill. And I said, sometimes that's because Mummy's realized that she is scared that the people she's talking to are not going to take her seriously or hear her requests if she communicates it in a way that might be a little bit more meek, a little bit more quiet. Because I've felt like I have to show up more in my masculine, let's put it that way, or raise my voice a little bit in order to be heard. And I said, I've been really trying to have conversations with people to say, I'm going to communicate differently from now on. Please still give my words this weight, and sharing from a place of vulnerability that I'm afraid of not being heard if I choose to communicate differently. And I said, is that what's happening with you? Is that why you are coming out so strong, or with the sass? And she acknowledged that. And I said, great, let's talk about our big emotions. Let's talk about our fears. And I feel like, having been raised to be a good girl, I want to raise a girl who knows how to communicate and say, I don't think you heard me. So before I yell or raise my voice, I'm going to say it again, and I'm asking you to listen. And so we've been having a lot of those conversations, which I'm finding I'm having a lot in and around. There's a lot of topics that I know we're not going to get into today, but people have energies, and I've been sharing those with people and saying, no, tell me what you think. I may not agree, but I'm at the point in my life where I know what I know, and I'm happy to hear what you say, and then I will respond accordingly and share from that same space. And we've been having some amazing conversations, not just with my 7-year-old, but on a whole, which I would certainly love for more women. When you really know yourself, it's so much easier to engage in those things where, it's thin ice, because you don't have to you don't have to make anybody comfortable, and you also can say, I don't have to be uncomfortable as I disagree with you.
I love that you brought that up, and I think if there's one thing that on the plus side of what we've all been through in the last 2 years, and at the same time is deeply uncomfortable and could very much be seen as a negative, is that there have been so many polarizing opinions on everything. And it's got to the stage where people, it's like, if you don't agree with me, then I'm right and you're wrong, or I'm good and you're bad. Like we've got really divisive and really like stuck in our ways of thinking that it's a real wounded energy, and it's coming from such a place of fear, and I can totally understand that. And for me, being able to, having done a lot of the deep healing work, and being able to know actually what I believe, and being able to question it and explore it and be interested in other people's points of view, but know that I don't need to convince anybody of what I believe, and I don't need anyone to convince me of what they believe. And when you can have that conversation where both people are bringing that energy, it's an incredible space to be. At the same time, when one of you has that energy and the other one doesn't, wowzers, it can be deeply challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a bit of a shedding of the binary, isn't it? It's that concept of black and white, right and wrong, male and female, whatever it is. Like, we I think the uprising of that division and conflict that we've seen in the last couple of years has been based on that need for some people in the world to have that black and white approach to life because it feels safe, right? We know that, you know, when you look at black and white or shadow and light or whatever it is, one of them is perceived as good and one of them is perceived as not. And that makes people feel safe because they understand what the boundaries are for themselves. But I think what we're starting to understand, certainly in the people who are not subscribing to that thought process anymore, is that actually, like, we need the various shades of grey in between, and we need all of the colour outside of the lines and all of the things, because the black and white approach is not serving us. And it doesn't serve us in in our daily lives, but it also doesn't serve us in terms of where we are in the context of humanity. You know, we have to change something, and that's a big part of it, I think. So I like that awareness is kind of being cultivated in our young people, and certainly, you know, the conversation that you had around that, you know, repeating yourself and just saying, actually, I don't think you heard me, so I'm just going to repeat it, and you're going to listen.
We're just going to repeat it, and I've been thinking about that whole, you know, black and white, that, you know, it's really not that simple. And that's how I've engaged in a lot of conversations where, like you're saying, Ellie, you know, or Aaron, we're not on the same side, and we know that. I'm like, well, here's a thought. And it's really interesting because the feminine is very receptive, right? It is very much about receiving. In the past, we've received and sort of taken it within. And now I'm like, received, do I want to hold this? No, I'm going to volley this back on out. But here's how I'm going to, send it back out. And in some cases, right, and when we hold space for other women or other people, it's about holding and then potentially, you know, transforming. And there's been a lot of that. And I think as more and more of us who are deeply grounded in who we are and have done the deep healing work, it's such an opportunity, not necessarily to change minds, because we know that arguing is not going to do so, but this receiving and then releasing, such a powerful process.
Yeah, it really does. It changes everything about it. And yeah, it's a really interesting space to be in. And you're right, it works at any age as well. That's what's so wonderful. And yeah, I also loved hearing the way that you talk to your 7-year-old, because I've got a nearly 6-year-old, so I'm desperately like gaining any sort of intel or support that is going to help me with my already very, very sassy daughter, and how to manage that. So I will be making notes afterwards and probably have you on speed dial for as and when I need more advice about it. But being able to, like you say, hold the space for it, but then not take it on. Like that, I mean, that for me has been my biggest learning this year, is not holding on to other people's stuff and being able to say, like, actually, that's nothing to do with me. That is yours. That is yours to carry. And whilst I am willing to hold the space for you to unpack it, I'm not carrying it for you. I'm giving it back. And it's a really interesting change for me in how to be able to do that. And it's something that I have to do on a daily basis, remind myself is that that's not about me, that's actually about you. But at the same time, being able to teach my 5-year-old that is huge. I mean, imagine if we knew that as children, that when people are mean to us, or when people say things that are unkind or don't take it into account our feelings, actually it's nothing to do with us as individuals, it's all about the person saying it. I mean, that's just game changing, and I feel privileged to have worked that out myself, and now to be able to support others, because geez, it's big stuff.
It's big stuff.
I just want to circle back around to something that you talked about, Candice, when you were saying that we receive these things from the world, but because we know our own truth, we're able to kind of decide for ourselves and filter for ourselves what we do take on and what we send back. And and the energy behind that, it is very feminine and that receptive, but there's also a decent dose of masculine, right? And I think that's the
harmony that we're all looking for within ourselves is that knowing that we can choose to take things on or choose to send them back, but we are so convicted in our own truth that we don't have to convince anyone else of it. Like, our truth exists regardless of whether you believe me or not. Right. And it's something that we talked about on a walk and talk the other day, actually, about how, to honor my own truth, I have to honor your truth as well. And so I don't need to convince you of your truth being wrong or anything like that. I can stand firm in my own, and because the minute that I try and defend my truth, I inherently start attacking yours.
Yes.
And that's not serving anybody.
What's fun for me to add to what you're saying is when I realize and people are coming up, they give themselves away, right? So, and I think that's a level of maturity that comes right when you've done the work. And I see this in my 7-year-old, right? When she is like losing her mind because I need her to eat 7 bites, because 7's the magical number, because we're 7 years old now, 7 bites of peas, right? And I am the worst mommy ever. Yes, I am. And you're still going to eat your peas. I don't need to engage with that because it's a 7-year-old temper tantrum, and I'm holding her best by not engaging. It doesn't mean I, tell her all about peas and why peas are the best thing ever, because she's not going to listen. And maybe it's that awareness of not only my personal development, but also being a mom, that sometimes when these people come out of nowhere and they're like, well, what do you think? And they just disappear. I'm smiling, which confuses people. You guys should do it more often. Just smile and don't say anything, because they'll do all the talking and let you know exactly who they are, what they believe, where they're at in their personal development. And I think that as you become more developed and you start to realize where people are at, that is a responsibility to hold space for them to figure it out. It is not your job to necessarily help them get there. They can hire a coach and do that. They can wait for life to kick their teeth in, just like you had yours kicked in. And there is so much wisdom in just keeping your mouth shut, because then in the moment that you do, and certainly this is a moment for those of us who are deeply grounded and know where the boundaries need to be, we need to be speaking up. But I think we can throw, and to quote an old text, we can throw our pearls before swine. People who won't care, who will just shut it down, make you angry, drag you into their stuff, rather than wisdom, which is very, very quiet. And when she does speak, she speaks from a place of love, compassion, kindness, because she's got nothing to prove. But she knows that when you speak truth, and I've seen this even in myself as I started to communicate my truth. So for me, that means the stuff that was true for me. But when I shared it from that place that was, it had no ego, it was just, this is the raw me. I can't make your meeting because I'm just exhausted today. I don't really want to do this. I know I said yes, but now I need to say no. This is why, and I'm truthful. Even if it makes people unhappy, they respond well. And I've been sort of applying that to a lot of other areas. So for those people who are like,
Yeah. And I think that brings us really nicely onto the conversation of boundaries, which I really also wanted to touch on and hear your take on it, because again, boundaries are something that women inherently struggle with, because again, we've been told that we've got to be all things to all people, ahead of ourselves, and be grateful and cheerful about the whole thing. And you don't just have to do it, but you've got to do it with good grace. I always remember that. And it's just like, how do we actually put in boundaries? Because people don't like, if there have been no boundaries in place, people really struggle when boundaries then get put in place. How do you, what are your recommendations? What have you done that's worked? What have you done that's monumentally failed? Because it's always useful to hear those stories as well. But how have you brought boundaries in? Because I think they're so important, and they're so, overlooked so much of the time. Mm. 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 And so many people would, and that's the big challenge, isn't it, when we set these boundaries and we start to know our truth and what we stand for, is that when you start to actually share that out in the world, there are going to be people who do not want to hear it, who will not accept it, and who will be angry about it. And that's coming back to almost what we were talking about earlier, is that's remembering that actually that's their story. That's theirs to carry. That's nothing to do with you setting a boundary. That's nothing to do with you owning who you are and speaking your truth. That is a reflection of how they are in the world. And it's one of the biggest challenges because, again, I mean, it all ties in. They're all threads of the same, piece of knitwear. They're all parts of it, because if we can't accept what other people, are being or thinking, then we go into that space of trying to fix it, and we change ourselves to try and make them okay. So when you do step into who you really are, like, it's so rewarding on so many levels, and that will always outweigh everything else. But when you're learning it, when you're retraining your brain, when you're rewiring it, there will be days when it feels really, really difficult. And there will be days when you think, I don't even know what the next step is to do or who to talk to. And that's where, spaces like this, hopefully people listening, if anyone's listening and feels like this, please know that you are not on your own in this space. All three of us here have been through it many times. We'll go through it again, and it is part of life. But it is so rewarding when you're willing to do the hard work, that I would encourage anyone to stick with it. But geez, it's difficult. What comes up for you, Erin, in all of this?
A couple of things when it comes to boundaries. I mean, I think the first thing that I want to point out around boundaries is that while it's important to know where you want boundaries to be, that represents a general area. It doesn't necessarily mean you put it in the ground and it stays there forever and ever and amen, and I think the thing that I want to express in this moment is just that you have permission to have fluidity around those boundaries. So if you know that there is a boundary around, as an example, I have a friend who's like, don't contact me at dinner time. Like, just don't, because I won't answer the call. That's time that I spent with my children. But then, she's also fluid enough to know that actually, if I do contact her at that time, there's a good reason for it, and she will think about her boundary in that moment and choose to move it if it feels right for her to do that. And so I think it's important to know that, whether it's about that personal space, and this is something we talk about with our children a lot, is, it's okay to have different personal boundaries for different people, right? Like, you get to choose that. But the other part of that I think is important, is that why we're setting up the boundary and the energy behind that is important, right? We don't want to set boundaries from a place of aggression, because that makes it harder for other people to respect them. So I think it's about saying, actually, like, I'm setting this boundary from a place of love, because if you come past that point, I can't guarantee I'm going to receive it with love. Right? And I also need to love myself enough to know that that's where my limit is today. And it might change tomorrow, and that's fine. But if we set it from a place of aggression, like, I just don't want you in my space right now, or it's not okay for you to do this, then it's not received with any energy other than that aggression. And so it becomes really challenging for other people, especially if they are the kind of people who are likely to, push the limits of those boundaries. It makes it really hard for them to respond in a way that actually serves us. So, I think those are the two things that came up for me listening to you both speak, is just around that, like, what is the energy behind that boundary? But also, like, having fluidity around it and giving yourself permission to say, actually, today, as much as my boundary has always been here for you, it's just a little bit further out, because I'm not, I'm dealing with some other stuff, or I'm not feeling like I can communicate with you yet because I don't really know what I need to say, or whatever it is. We always need to give ourselves permission to set the boundary where we need it to be. And I think we're not particularly good at that as women. We tend to, like, we set a boundary and then we're like, okay, cool, that's where it is. And even if we're not feeling energetically aligned with it in that moment, or we feel a little bit emotionally fragile about it or whatever, we still hold it in that space because it's too hard to push it out further. Because we're like, but we've set that boundary. And it's that people pleaser in us, right? Coming back and saying, actually, I set the boundary. They know where it is. I couldn't possibly move it. But actually, it doesn't serve anyone to leave it where it is if that's imposing on something that's going to cause you to be triggered or respond in a way you don't want to, I think. So that was what came up for me. And plus, I just like listening to you guys talk. Yeah. If you ever need a fly on the wall for your conversations, I'm it.
Yeah, boundaries in a really uncreepy way, right?
Sure, yeah. That's totally what I meant.
But I think, boundaries are just so... It's also interesting when you start to just, like, pull one thread and how much of it's interconnected. And we kind of don't necessarily realise that when we start on the journey. We'll, like, pick one thread and think, this is the bit I'm going to focus on. And then it kind of quickly unravels and you're like, oh, man, I've got all these other bits to deal with. How do I decide which bit to do first? And it's really overwhelming. And I do think that's where... finding people who can support you, whether it's friends, whether it's coaches, whether it's healers, whoever it is, be open to welcoming who you need into your life to help you. And like you said right at the start, angels show up when you need them. And I firmly believe that if you kind of open yourself to having support, then it will come to you. And it's such I love that you said that, because it's really, how has that shown up for you? Like those people who've sort of come in. Yeah. Yeah. Fixer.
Yeah. A life mechanic, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Love that. What a great space to end this conversation. Now, Erin, I know you've got some questions to quick fire.
Yeah, some random quick fire questions to finish things off. So I'm just going to dive on in. What book have you read that you wish you had written? Nice. Yeah, nice. This one's, overused, but I'm doing it anyway. Who are the 3 people, living or dead, that you would invite over for dinner?
Nice.
Dang.
Can I come to that one as well?
Yeah. Ellie's just like, where's my invite?
Yeah. In fact, we should do it that we're going. Yeah, no, we're going anyway. We're the other 2 people. It's fine.
Okay, cool.
It's making up an easy.
Yeah. Cool. What do you want your 90-year-old self to be able to say to your current self?
Nice.
Nice. And last one, what is your guilty pleasure? Okay, well, what are your favorite things on Netflix? Like, give us an insight into the dark and yeah, I agree totally. Nice.
Love that.
Nice. Well, I think, we all need heroes, and thanks for playing your part in being one in the world. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to have you on our show, and I know, right? Yeah. It's always a pleasure, and we are very grateful to be connected, and grateful to see you out in the world doing the work that you do and the way that you do it. It's really inspiring, I think, for us, but for also to share with our audience the type of women that are out there, quietly and not so quietly doing their work in the world, and just being prepared to own their own space. And it's a really, really beautiful thing. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the love.
So gorgeous to connect. So I just literally could speak for hours and hours with you. It's just it's delightful, and keep doing what you're doing. And I'm going to remember that. Just sometimes we can just say it quietly. I'll try.
Yeah, I'll remind her of that too. So that, everybody, thank you. And a coffee mug as well, please. Thank you so much. Everybody who is listening, that is Candice Smiley. She is a phenomenon and a wonderful person, and you should absolutely check out the show notes for her details, and we will be back next week. So thank you, Candice, for joining us.